like to start in about 1989. I had an extraordinary experience, and it plays into this subject. I was in in Munich for the 50th anniversary of jet flight, which the Germans were celebrating, and managed to have a fly-on-the-wall experience that I'll always remember. I was with two people. One of them was Jack Steiner. And Jack Steiner is the person who designed and led the project to build the 727, which for a long time was the most popular airliner around. And he was a terrifically impressive person. He was well over 6 feet tall, and he was always a dominating presence in a room. And he had to be the smartest man in the room. And so lots of people at Boeing disliked him, but they couldn't deny his talent. And so he came in late. The person who was there just before him.
Okay. It's on mute. I'm not hearing very well, I'm sorry.
Was this man, I don't have a better picture, John
Ritter,
Ritter, who was the head of probably preliminary design. He didn't have a title that alerted me to anything. But anyway, by this point, Jack Steiner was a memorable figure. He was about to retire at Boeing, and it sort of was still extremely influential on design. And Ritter is a small man who started to engage Steiner. I don't know why I was at this meeting. And Ritter talked about a number of subjects about airplanes, and Steiner wasn't responding. And Ritter finally came to a point where he couldn't say much more. And then he started over again, and he said, you know, at least Boeing didn't design something on this line. Boeing didn't design that dog of an airplane, the Concorde. Well, that got my attention. And you all know what the Concorde is. It's the only really successful SS supersonic airplane that's ever been built. And it was flying, but only 16 of them had been built, and I don't even think that many were actually flying. And he says, we should have, it would have been great if we at Airbus had built the something like the 747. And then he launches into saying, the reason it's such a dog is that it flies from Paris to New York. That's fine. You have lunch and you have your business meeting. But when you get back to Paris, you're there too late to go anywhere. And so you take a hotel room, and in come all the people on the 747 who have paid $600 for their flight instead of $4,000. And they all spend the night together and go out on the same airplane to Berlin or wherever. And Steiner finally rises up to the occasion and he says, people will always want to fly faster. And that's the end of the evening. And what I realized at the time is Airbus has 747 or giganticness envy, and Boeing has speed envy. They've switched positions. Okay, and there is something I didn't know further. I'll tell you. Airbus is planning, and Ritter is starting the project. Airbus is planning to build the biggest airplane around, and its intention is to be bigger than Boeing, and it's believing that this airplane, the 747, is the explanation for Boeing's success. That it's in the part of the market, long distance, heavy traffic, that is making it so successful. And if it builds an airplane bigger than Boeing, it will capture the market, take Boeing's prospect or prosperity away from it, and Airbus will be the top dog. Well, neither Steiner or I knew these aspirations because Airbus at that time was selling maybe 12 airplanes a year or some really small number. It had about 15% of the market maybe. And Steiner's response to it is sort of typical of Boeing's attitude. Well, there's this outfit in Europe that's still trying to build airplanes, copying ours and all that. Yeah. So, in 1970, Boeing did try to build an SST, and this is the mock-up for it. Boeing really wanted to build it, but it needed government money, and I think government was going to cover about 75% of the cost. But people didn't like, in Congress, didn't like it because it might create ozone, which turned out not to be an issue, or that it created a huge amount of noise, and we were never going to let it fly over land and break windows across the country. And so they took away the funding for it. They had to pay the development costs. So Boeing had just gone through the crash of its market. You remember in 1970 and the billboard in front of Seattle. Well, this is just slightly afterwards, and because it's generally felt, I think, that because the government was going to cover 75% of the cost, the government helped us, bailed us out of the financial struggles that we were in 1970. And the reason ultimately that this hasn't been built since then is fuel costs. This uses so much fuel that we would it doesn't make you can never make a financial argument for it. And so there was a long period, a long delay before Boeing designed another airplane, and it looks like all other airplanes, of course. And the long delay in the midst of it, the president of Boeing, then T. Wilson, said he got tired of engineers wanting to build the SST, and he made an announcement: Boeing is not going to build an SST, and the banks can breathe a sigh of relief because we would have to borrow money that we would never be able to pay back. So in any event, they went back to just an ordinary airplane. But enough had been done on the SST in the electronics areas that although looks like an ordinary airplane, it has a lot of systems in it that were very in the SST that were very useful in building this. And so the production of this airplane went very smoothly, and it got into the air at minimum costs. One of the things that happened to make that possible, to make it such a successful airplane, although you don't really remember too much about the 767s because it looks like just an ordinary airplane, is that it was two engines, and up till that time, two engines generally didn't go very far over water because there wasn't a sense of reliability that two engines, what happens if one engine goes out? Is the other one safe enough to get you to the next point? And so there was an effort by Airbus to start this idea of two engines over water, but Boeing took it a lot further with the 767, and that was to say, well, what's the likelihood of one engine failing and the other one failing after that? Well, very likely, unlikely if you can go 60 minutes with extremely low chance of an engine failing. And so they created this system called ETOPS. And I just wanted to show you the map of, this sort of 600 mile an hour, not 600 mile circles. These are, so if you can always be within land of, within 600 miles, you could go, or excuse me, I should say 600 minutes. Let me get this right. 60 minutes. If you always can be within land in 60 minutes, you can fly from here to there. So this will become important, even more important to Boeing later. This is the Airbus 300, which in 1974 started Airbus. And the attitude of Boeing was, a European airplane? That's a contradiction in terms. They've started dozens of airplanes. They've never sold more than a handful. Most of them go out of business even before they even get the first production ones. And Airbus does get this into the air, and it seems to be true. They sell, I think in the first 3 years, 13 airplanes. And Boeing says, well, we're not going to pay any attention to Airbus. And they didn't through all the 70s and into the 80s and up till the 89. And then in the midst of this, Airbus puts out this little airplane that's a direct rival to the Boeing 737, which at that point is the most successful airplane Boeing has built. And Boeing still doesn't get the whole point that Airbus is really intent upon getting Boeing. One thing that Boeing knows about Airbus is it's not paying off these airplanes. How is this possible? And in fact, how is it even managing to get the money to start these programs? And I think we're basically still figuring this out. There is no Airbus company. There is at that point companies in Germany, in France, Spain, and Britain that have agreed to build an airplane. Somehow they're getting their money. It's still something of a mystery. How they divide up the costs between them is still something of a mystery. How they agree to their payments, it's a mystery. The Airbus company will eventually, these companies will congeal into the Airbus company. But at this point, they are just being supported basically by government donations. And then Boeing gets the idea that that maybe Airbus is getting really serious and has unlimited pockets. And because the European governments, now it's clear, have agreed to pay all the development costs for Airbus. It has now become an employment project, and Europe has identified airplanes as an important technology for other industries, that it's electronics and navigation and other sorts of systems are useful for economic development. And in this case, they've now brought out two much larger airplanes, and it's now Boeing's going to pay a little bit more attention to what's going on at Airbus. The lower one is pretty much an unsuccessful airplane. But Jean Roeder has convinced Airbus to build these two airplanes, and we're talking in the 80s now. He's convinced them that the smaller one is going to be 2 engines, and the bigger one is going to be 4 engines. It's going to have a long range, and it's going to have a large passenger capacity, and it's going to start butting up against the 747. It's going to start challenging it from below. So there is a third party in all this, and you know that it's McDonnell Douglas in California, which prior to 1950s was the dominant company. But it's been making a lot of mistakes, and it's now down to just 2 airplanes, a little 2-engine airplane, the DC-9, and this one, the MDL-10, which is with slight modifications that you see that are in this particular airplane, the MD-11. And the MD-11 is is an airplane that's taking advantage of the situation created by the 747. The 747 is not just 50% bigger than the airplane, the 707 that it follows. It's 150% bigger. It's huge at that time, and it still is. And so it leaves a lot of space in economical and passenger traffic space between it and the 707. And so Douglas wants to fill that space, that market opportunity, and that's what this airplane is doing. But it never does it quite properly. This airplane gets a poor reputation, and it never gets a large enough number of orders to do it, and it has, because of some of the design flaws, crashes, and of course that's a ruinous experience. So Boeing has brought out after the SST just the 767 and a smaller cousin to it, and then this airplane. Boeing gets in the 90s serious about going back to a real airplane, and there's still this enormous pressure inside the company to build something new. But this is, again, an ordinary airplane, fuselage and wings and 2 engines. And Boeing builds this airplane in about, from design to finish in about 4 years. Part of that's done by the fact that it's the first computer-designed airplane for Boeing. So it does it, and it is built with a lot of airline input. They created a committee of airlines, and they all had their sort of say about this airplane. And so it did a lot of the things that airlines appreciated. I have to say, before this, Boeing tended to have so many, such dominant skills that it pretty much told the airlines what they wanted, what airplanes, how big the airplanes they needed for their route, when they should buy them. And airlines got pretty sick of that, as you can imagine. And but this airplane, they tended to do a better job with and involve the airlines to a far greater extent, and it did very well. This Airbus's plan, though, for dealing with the 747 is to build a bigger airplane. Boeing's plan for dealing with the 747 was to bring out the airplane I just showed you, the 777, because with 2 engines, the 777 would have almost the size of the 747, but would be much more economical. You only have to buy 2 engines, you only have to service 2 engines, the gas usage, which is a dominant important issue again, is much better in the 2-engine airplane. But Airbus's plan was, with the earlier airplane and the A380, it will pinch the 747. And so Boeing stops building the 747 and lets the 727. And this 777, which is so ordinary, basically ruins the plan of Airbus over this period, because it does what the A340 can do. It does what this huge airplane, the A380, can do, and it also involves something that Airbus makes a big mistake about. What is the marketplace for airplane? What sort of airplane do we need? And Airbus says, well, this airplane, the A380, can fly into hubs, do it cheaper than anybody else can, and then from the hubs, people go out to their smaller locations. The 777 is built with an idea that Boeing is adopting, is that people don't want to fly to hubs. They want to fly point to point. They want to fly Seattle to Boston. They don't want to fly to New York and then to Boston. Which one is going to win out? Well, Boeing won out on that question. And so Boeing really has a lot of advantages in this big airplane market. I have to also say for the A380 that there's some things that bothers me, and this is my Boeing background. This is about the ugliest airplane I've ever seen. I don't know what animal it looks like, but maybe a sloth. And I have another problem with this. I don't think airplanes should be bigger than the 747. And other people have said it too. Big airplanes have not been very successful. They've been built in ones and twos. And there's something that just is wrong about a huge airplane. And this is the escape slide on an A380. Those are people that, let's get this going. Those are people down there. You are in this position 3.5 stories above the ground. And you're told, you're gonna get out of this burning airplane by going down this slide. No, I'm not gonna be. And it's generally, I used to have talks with the designer of the chief engineer of the 747. And he said, the reason he didn't put a second story on the 747 is just because of this. It was going to be a one-story airplane, because the result of this is you're going to take people off of the slide with broken bones. There's no way you drop. And imagine doing it in the dark with smoke in the airplane. And people of our age. Well, in the middle of the 90s, T. Wilson retired, and he turned the presidency over to the man on the right, a man named Phil Condit, who had been a distinguished high-ranking official at Boeing. He was very heavily involved in building the 777, so it's natural that the job would go to him. On the left is a man named Jack Welch, who is the head of the GE, which builds a large portion of the jet engines in this country and abroad. And he established a certain type of managerial style in which you get rid of people who look like they're in the bottom 10th of your employment group, and you spend just as little as you possibly can. And when you want to get by, when you have to do subcontracts, well, you have people bidding against each other, and you force them down to the absolute bare minimum where nobody else will bid against the last bidder. And it's a type of frugality that at first hugely impressed the stock market. And eventually GE had really bad, and I say eventually, like after 20 years, this process has a very bad ending where you can still make some money, but you can't develop products, you can't do a whole lot of things. And So Welch had a big influence on Phil Condit. Phil Condit also had other difficulties. He was not a very good leader, and when Boeing bought McDonnell Douglas and merged the two companies, Phil Condit had to deal with the fact that he had to bring in some of the people from McDonnell Douglas, but he also had employees to get rid of. And I knew of one person who was pretty much gotten rid of, but Phil Condit kept avoiding her in the halls because he couldn't deal with the fact that he couldn't fire her. He couldn't stand the experience of doing that. He liked her. Well, anyway, so Boeing still has this urge to do something huge, something big, something new, something revolutionary. And the 747 has largely filled the biggest niche at that point. What could they do? And they decide, well, let's build an airplane that's faster, but not supersonic. And it'll go not the speed of sound or more, it will go just a little bit below the speed of sound, and therefore it won't run up such huge fuel bills, but actually it will run up pretty big fuel bills. And so they designed this airplane called the Sonic Cruiser. It's an interesting idea. It gets out of the sort of normal shape that airplanes have to be put in, but it still has big fuel bills. And so they trot it around to the airlines, and I see what they want. And they say, no thank you, we're all about low fuel costs. We're not interested in higher fuel costs, even though it goes 100 miles an hour faster than an ordinary airliner. And so this airliner, this one is scrapped after a huge amount of effort is put into it. This man is the man who has a lot to apologize for. He publishes this book on himself, Michael Sears. He's an employee brought in from McDonnell Douglas. Now, McDonnell Douglas is a very different idea of how to stay in business. It's largely a company in the Jack Welch style of spend as little, get rid of employees, break unions, and pay yourself a whole lot of money. But this man, Michael Sears, is the man touted to become president after Phil Condit, and he publishes a book about himself and how wonderful he is, and I have not looked at it. But I've read a lot of business books that published by the CEOs, and he runs into a little bit of trouble, and that is that he is promised a purchasing agent for the Air Force a job with Boeing once she retires. Now, I don't know how this became public knowledge, but it did, and it went to the Justice Department, and the Justice Department pursued a case against him, and they broke into his emails, and it's all very clear, and he went to jail, and I think the purchasing agent also went to jail, both for relatively short periods of time. But it hugely spoiled Boeing, which had stayed pretty much on the straight and narrow, hadn't been convicted of any major crimes in the past, and so it was at great cost that this was done. Boeing's way of absorbing McDonnell Douglas was to find sort of secondary positions through the company. And so this man, Harry Stonecipher, who was the head of McDonnell Douglas, was made vice president of Boeing. Now this, he may look like a sort of a charming fellow, but he is in the Jack Welch style of administrators, if not even tougher. And he's a very intimidating sort of guy, and he pretty much shoves the president around. That's Phil Condit again. And it's time to say a little bit about McDonnell Douglas, how it operated. McDonnell Douglas had been declining for a long time, and then in the 90s, it bid on an Air Force contract that would pretty much decide if McDonnell Douglas was going to survive. McDonnell Douglas was primarily a military company, and as a military company, the things had gotten tougher during the Cold War. There were fewer contracts and they were bigger contracts. And a lot of airplane companies had disappeared by now. And McDonnell Douglas and Lockheed and Boeing were really the only big enough companies to do a new fighter contract. McDonnell Douglas lost. Now, there are some people who say that Harry Stonecipher was put in there to sell the company to Boeing. The whole point of his position was to get a good price from Boeing. And the head of Airbus said Stonecipher lost the competition deliberately so that it would become so it would have to become somebody else's property, and he was there to sell it to lose the contract and sell to Boeing. You see, this is getting pretty questionable all around, and the Air Force would have done that. They would have said, we're not going to lose all the manufacturing capacity of McDonnell Douglas on this because of this contract, and we're going to force Boeing to buy it. I don't know what the real story is, and I don't know that anybody has really written from it up on the inside. But things are not entirely what they appear, like losing contracts and winning contracts. In any event, Lockheed won the contract, as it turned out. Boeing, it's said that Boeing was very happy to get a strong military side. It had a fairly weak military side, and this would give it a strong military side. That, I don't think, has worked out very well. I have to say that purchasing airplanes is very different if you're selling airplanes is very different if you're selling to the military or if you're selling to commercial airlines. It's not at all the same. When you're selling to the military wants to make sure that you don't make a real big profit because it's responsible to Congress. Because Congress gets very upset if you make up more than, well, the last I saw was about 6%. And I've mentioned this in an earlier lecture. If you're selling to commercial airlines, they don't care what your percentage is. They just want the cheapest airplane they can buy, as you and I do when we go out and buy a car. So there's a very different attitude about the whole purchase process. And there are lots of other differences as well. And so if you work in one side of if you work on one side of this divide or the other, you're generally not very good at doing the other side. And there's only rarely has there ever been a company that's been very good at being commercial and being military. They're not going forward. So Harry Stone's cipher is there for several years. Why did Phil Condit leave? Well, when Michael Sears bribed the purchasing agent, Phil Condit said, well, I'm really embarrassed about this, and he resigned. And there's some people who feel that Stone cipher really had a coup in the process to get rid of Phil Condit over the Sears problem. Well, Stone cipher left after a couple of years because he had angered a lot of people by then, and they felt that he had to go as soon as they found out that he was having a sexual relationship with a subordinate, something that would usually not get a person into too much trouble at an engineering company. So anyway, they went looking around and they found a protege of Jack Welch again. This is a man who was up for Jack Welch's position and came in second, and so he went to 3M and was briefly there, and then came to Boeing. And he is another one who writes a book about himself. Not a good sign, but lessons from Jim McNerney's turnaround at Boeing. Well, he didn't turn around Boeing. He got it into some more trouble. When he took office, there was a plan to build a new airplane. You'll see it in a moment, the 787, and it would. And as soon as he looked at it, he says, "Well, we're going to build it in half the time, with half the amount of money." And that turns out to be a disastrous plan. And he also, being part of the Jack Welch School of Management, he gets rid of employees as fast as he can, sells off assets as fast as he can. The whole process of bettering your subcontractors and taking the money. And the intention is to reduce Boeing down to a company that designs airplanes and does the final assembly, because those have been identified as the highest profit portions of the company. And everything in the middle is going to be done by some subcontractor that you're going to bully in the meantime. Well, half the time never worked out, and half the price didn't work out either. What happened is that this turned out to be from being, I don't know what the numbers are, something like a $10 billion airplane to a $50 billion airplane. A huge mistake, and it didn't come out in time, and it had years and years of delays during which Boeing had to pay the airlines for late deliveries. This is the airplane. It's the 787 Dreamliner that you see today. It's a wonderful airplane, and it is the strongest airplane in its market. But there are people who say that it will never make a profit because so much money was spent building it. They sold 1,900 airplanes. That's a pretty big number in this particular market, and still. I think it's probably broken even, but other people say it can't. Too much money was spent, and its newness is because it is built not of metal primarily, but of composite, something that is a layered fiberglass material, and then it's instead of the airplane being just metal clamped to one sheet of metal clamped together to another. It's made out of the fuselage is barrels of these laminates put together and then glued together. So it's the weight of it is much lower, and so it operates with very good economics. The other thing that McNerney did was he didn't try to build a replacement for the 737. It long needed a replacement. And he just kept putting it off. And then when the Airbus came out and said, we're attaching the latest new engines to our airplane, our A320, McNerney suddenly sprang to life and decided to update the 737 with the engines. And this is, of course, the cause of the crash of the 737s. The engines have to be relocated because they were too big for the airplane, and that caused downstream engineering problems to add systems to make sure that the airplane was controlled under certain circumstances by electronics. And the airline said, well, we don't want an airplane that forces us to reteach our pilots new tricks. So Boeing decides, well, we won't tell them about the new tricks. And this is the result. This is an interesting, this is the crash in Indonesia, as you can read. It's an interesting picture because I doubt if anybody here saw a picture of this when it happened. You saw lots of debris pulled out of the water on the shore because the media wanted a disastrous looking picture. This doesn't look like a disaster. This looks like the people survived, but nobody did, actually. So you don't always get the proper story out of the television set. The fact, I think there's also the proper story not being told. Lion Air was an incompetent airline. It had only recently gotten, after years of application, a permission to fly into Europe. Its pilot was sick when he started this trip. The co-pilot had barely been able to pass his test, repeated tests, and to get his license. They didn't communicate in the airplane. But most of that cockpits, the issues in the cockpit and the airline never came up to the press. And Boeing took all the responsibility. By this point, a man named Dennis Muhlenberg was president. He was, in fact, a Boeing employee and an engineer, and well-liked, very capable, but not a person to do public relations for the company when these crashes occurred. And he gets in front of Congress, and he gets chewed up in the experience. And he tries to tell them that it's not our responsibility, and it's not my responsibility. He says, I grew up in Iowa, and I'll tell you what. And finally they say, we don't want to hear any more about Iowa. And he's forced out with a $60 million parachute. $60 million. The next person to take over from him is the head of the board of trustees, and it's a man named Calhoun. I'm not going to put his picture up, but he's written this book. It's a very bad sign when they write books. How companies win. Let me see if I can get. Well, anyway, it says by controlling the demand situation, and he basically, he's another protege of who else? Jack Welch. And Jack Welch has convinced him, fire as many people as you can. You know, I won't do it again. But this man probably is fairly able at running a drugstore or drug company like Walgreens. He thinks they're all the same. All companies are the same. They need the same standards. You can go from one to another. He doesn't understand airplanes at all. And so the requirements that he is given at the beginning of his tenure of about 5 years and the requirements that would be written if he had continued are the same. He's got nothing done at the end of 5 years. And they finally get rid of him. And the present president is Kelly Ortberg, who is in office. And Ortberg won't be around very long because he's already 65 years old. But he seems to be doing pretty well. And as to the future, well, the future is going to look a little bit like the past. These are the engines, as you know, drive the design of airplanes. And the engines of the future seem, at least at the moment, will look like this. And I would say also the airplanes are going to look like the ones we started out with. They aren't going to change because all the demands on airplanes are going to be about the same. All the aerodynamic and weight and such demands. You're going to see lighter airplanes, you're going to see more powerful engines, you're going to see the same shape of the airplanes, I suspect, unless something drastic happens. So for the rest of our lives, we're going to get in airplanes that look very familiar to us, but they might be Airbuses. Well, thank you very much. Okay, anybody here from Airbus? Peter, yeah.
You imply that Airbus is now basically Boeing.
It is.
Correct.
At least in smaller airplanes. Boeing is doing quite well in those larger two-engine those larger airplanes, the one with 2 aisles. Airbus is playing catch-up in that portion of the marketplace. But in the small airplane market, Airbus is winning easily.
When you say winning easily, you mean other countries are buying Airbus.
I'm sorry.
Other countries are buying Airbus, not Boeing.
Yes.
Right?
And I'm afraid that the present administration is going to help them, as you can imagine.
Yeah, so I work with some.
Wait for the.
I'll repeat the question.
Yeah, I worked in a nonprofit on fair trade with some SPIA people, the Boeing Engineers Union, in the early 2000s, and they were constantly complaining about how it had ceased to be an engineering-led company, an engineering-driven company, and it was being driven by cost-cutters who wanted to increase the profits per share so that they could exercise their stock options at the highest possible price. And so there was an element of corporate greed in this whole thing. And the other element...
Imagine.
Yeah, the other element about outsourcing stuff was it was outsourced parts of the company to non-union areas. So they also put it to the Boeing machinists to do less and less work, union work, and more non-union work.
Yes, McNerney created a whole new factory in South Carolina, largely because it didn't have union workers. One of the things that endeared the present president, Oberg, is that he said the next airplane is going to be built in Seattle.
Right.
There's really an asterisk on that. He doesn't have any plans to build a new airplane.
Paul, excuse me.
Yes.
Recently there's been a lot of issues around the quality of Boeing. Doors flying off in midair, other things like that. How is Boeing addressing those issues?
Well, when Oberg took over, he didn't try to increase the number of airplanes that are building. And I don't know the details of this, but he slowed things down in order to get the issues like you described settled out and get the production process straightened out. The production process is by far the most important issue at Boeing. It's not the design, it's not the finance and such. The production process is so expensive, it involves so many thousands of people, and it leads, in some cases, to things like doors blowing off. And so you really want to get that straightened out. And he seems to have recognized that.
Thank you.
A neighbor who was a troubleshooter for Boeing, and he spent a lot of his time dealing with the 787 in Italy and Japan because the parts weren't all fitting together.
Yeah.
And I also have a nephew by marriage who was the chief pilot for Singapore Airlines and Malaysian. He said that the 737 that they put together that fell there was a case of putting too much engine on the wrong fuselage.
Well, I can't speak to that very well, but the 737 got a reputation for being badly built. The 787 that were built in Charleston, South Carolina, got a reputation for being badly built. At one point, Qatar Airlines said that it wouldn't receive any more from South Carolina. And that was under McNerney. And McNerney's solution was to take all the airplanes out, all the 787s out of Washington State and sending them to South Carolina. I don't understand. Yeah, it's their decision making is these Jack Welch proteges. Their decision making is so bad that it's just unexplainable, and they continue with them even when they're the problem is pointed out. Well, I guess it is explainable. The Welch system is to make money for the stockholders and themselves, and they can do that even as the company is going out of business. So.
Where they cut people and dropped people was to in the process and quality control areas. And many companies, many manufacturing companies, that's where they start cutting costs. Quality control and deferred maintenance and the intricate processes that have to be controlled. So I hope that, I think that Ortberg has been restoring quality and process control.
At one point, I saw that McNerney had cut 900 quality inspectors. It's a huge number of people. And the explanation that's usually done for something like that is, well, if you think about quality, inspectors, they don't put anything together. They don't add to the airplane in any way. They're just an overhead cost. And so there's a desire, at least by what are called bean counters, to get rid of them. They're always threatened.
Paul, do you expect Boeing to continue in operation?
Yeah, I think so. Actually, I saw yesterday in the Wall Street Journal that there's an expectation that Boeing is going to be doing really well, at least in the larger airplanes, in the next couple of years. I personally think that they need to bring out a new small airplane to replace the 737. It is there are features of it like hydraulics and such that should be replaced with motors and such, and you can't just switch them out. So I think there is the opportunity for doing that, Because if you look at the order numbers, Airbus has 700 or 7,000 orders for A320s, and its competitor, the Boeing, has something like 5,600. They can't build that many airplanes probably in the next dozen years. So if you have a dozen years, you can build an airplane, design and build an airplane in that part, and probably even get some of the business away from Airbus.
You and I, Paul, have talked about Boeing as an investment now. But after the meeting, if anybody here is interested in that subject, I'd like to talk with them about the possibilities and problems of Boeing stock as an investment.
Well, the Wall Street Journal would agree with you, but
Well, what did the great journalists...
I don't do that sort of investment, so I wouldn't encourage it.
Well, I'm not saying I'm in favor of it, I'm just curious what they said.
Boeing's stock can go up without me responding.
Hi. You have detailed a succession of 6 or more CEOs of Boeing, and you have not discussed the role of the board of directors. And I wonder why the board of directors continue to hire Jack Welch proteges as they saw the indicators of Boeing go down. They seem to be fixated on this, and why do they not turn it around? They're the key deciders here.
I don't know what stock the board of directors own, but the board of directors are largely appointed by the president of the company, which would have been Phil Condit, who wanted to get the company to be more profit-oriented, and then by Harry Stonecipher, who was selected by the board of trustees to do exactly that. And there isn't enough independence to do it. About a year ago, when I was really upset about what was happening, I went through all the board of directors, looking at their names and their history, and all the top management. And this was under Calhoun, the previous president. And I thought, this is a pitiful group of people to be running a company. And I wrote to a person who writes on Boeing for the Seattle Times, and he says, well, you can say that, but I can't. And so some things don't get into the press unless somebody like a prominent person will say it out loud. And but you're absolutely right. It's the responsibility of the board of directors, but they themselves are of the same sort as the management.
Right, so they're a rubber stamp.
They're
Not quite?
well, they are certainly rubber stamping decisions, that the directors, that the president and CEOs make, but the president and CEOs are choosing the board of directors. So it's a very, it's
Incestuous.
yes, it's in chemistry it's called a covalent bond.
You mentioned the assembly being done all over the country. The engineer showed me a chart once of the 787, it was color-coded, about where the parts of the plane were made all over the world, like 50 or 60 different countries.
Yes.
This wing went that thing, that assembly. And has this come under the attention of the tariff-happy people in Washington?
Well, I'm sure everybody's worried about it because Boeing uses a lot of, brings in a lot of material, and it would get, depending on somewhere between 25 and 145% tariff. But it's not going to, I should point out that can't be entirely avoided. China demands that some of the airplane be built in China. Japan is a particularly good producer, but they want part of the airplane too. And it goes, that's the same all around. And Airbus does the same thing. It's a global market, and that should be understood, and it can't be avoided.
Yeah, there's a certain measure of that, because the national airlines in all the different countries will give credence to a manufacturer that builds, creates jobs and builds parts of the aircraft. So it was a sales measure as well.
Yes, it's business there has to be some business abroad, and it's been criticized a lot. Peter?
Can you say anything about the role that supplying the Defense Department plays at Boeing? Because I'm guessing that Boeing
On to the next
must
venue.
provide a lot of material to the Defense Department. Does that play a role in the decision making on the size of the planes or anything like that?
No, the commercial and the military are very independent ones. The leakage, if there is, and I think it does exist, is that things that are developed in the military are come over and are used in the commercial. And the fact that the Airbus A320 has electronics controls, they call it fly-by-wire, where is a leakage from military airplanes into the commercial market. It's surprising that it happened first in Airbus rather than in Boeing. But Boeing, it certainly happens, and it should, and it probably should, you know. Prue?
I'm not an engineer, and I'm not a pilot, and I'm not a designer, but I'm a citizen of Seattle, and Boeing and Seattle have been almost synonymous for years and years. We also have Amazon, and we also have Bill Gates.
Yes.
So, you know, it's not a total monopoly, but it is a huge portion, I always thought, of the Seattle economy. Do you see any impact of the kinds of things that you've described? I mean, how urgent is it that Boeing pull its act together for the sake of Seattle?
Well, certainly not as much as in the past, as you all realize. There's been a lot of diversification in the Seattle economy. If you had talked about 1955 or something like that, probably, more than half the economy. I once saw a report that Boeing publishes every year of how many people in the city owe their non-employees owe their jobs to Boeing. These are non-employees. And this economist, Elroy, says that it's about 2.8 people for every employee. So, now if you believe that, of course, I think you're making a big mistake. It's a Boeing requested document. So I would say probably more like 2 people per employee. I don't know how economists come up with numbers.
So you're not worried?
Well, it's a lot. We have about 70,000 people in the state working for Boeing. So you're talking about 210,000 people. That's a lot of employees. And most of them in the Seattle area. So, thank you very much.